Something is burning along the Persian Gulf coastline tonight. Not a drill, not a warning shot. Something that intelligence analysts are calling one of the most calculated and decisive military operations the United States has executed in this region in over a decade, and the world barely noticed. That is exactly how it was designed. For months, a quiet buildup had been happening beneath the surface, satellite imagery that never made it to mainstream news, naval movements dismissed as routine exercises, diplomatic backchannels going completely silent. And then, without warning, without a press conference, without a single official announcement, the United States military moved. What they just did to Iran's coastal hideouts is not just a military story, it is a signal. A message written in smoke and precision-guided steel, delivered to every government, every military commander, and every proxy network that has been watching and waiting to see how far America would actually go. The answer came fast, and it came hard. But here's what you need to understand before we go any further. This operation did not come out of nowhere. What happened along Iran's coastline is the final visible chapter of a much longer, much darker story. A story involving hidden weapons depots, shadow fleets, drone smuggling routes, and a network of coastal installations that Iran has spent years building specifically to avoid detection. They thought they were invisible. They were wrong. Let us go back to where this story actually begins, because the surface-level headlines will not give you the full picture. Iran's coastline stretches for over 2,400 kilometers along the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Gulf of Oman. For years, military strategists in Tehran understood something fundamental. If there was ever a direct confrontation with American naval power, open military bases would be the first targets. Conventional installations, radar systems, port facilities, all of it would be destroyed within hours. So Iran made a decision that changed everything. They went underground, they went hidden, they went coastal. What emerged over the following years was a network of facilities so carefully disguised that even Allied intelligence services struggled to map them completely. Fishing villages that were not really fishing villages. Warehouses along remote shorelines that stored far more than fishing equipment. Cave systems carved into cliff faces along the Makran coast, reinforced with concrete, ventilated, and equipped to house fast attack boats, drone launch systems, and weapons caches that could survive an initial airstrike. Iran called this strategy asymmetric deterrence. Western analysts called it something else entirely. They called it a nightmare, because here is the problem with hidden coastal infrastructure. It does not just defend Iran, it projects power outward. From these concealed positions, Iran could threaten commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. It could launch drone swarms against Gulf state partners of the United States. It could supply weapons to proxy forces across Yemen, Iraq, and Lebanon without ever exposing a conventional military footprint. The hideouts were not defensive positions. They were forward operating platforms for a shadow war. And for years, the strategy worked. But something shifted. And when it shifted fast. Over the past 18 months, the pattern of incidents in and around the Persian Gulf began escalating in ways that could no longer be absorbed diplomatically. Tankers were being harassed with increasing boldness. American naval vessels reported being tracked and approached by Iranian fast boats operating out of positions that did not appear on any official military map. Drone attacks on American-aligned infrastructure in the region were traced back to launch coordinates that kept pointing to the same stretches of remote Iranian coastline. Intelligence reports began landing on desks in Washington, with the same conclusion repeated over and over. The hidden coastal network was not just operational, it was being actively used to run an undeclared campaign of maritime pressure against American interests and Allied shipping. Every incident was deniable. Every provocation was calibrated just below the threshold that would trigger an immediate military response. Iran had been playing this game for years. They were good at it. But there is a limit to how long any game like that can continue before someone decides to change the rules entirely. That decision was made, and what came next? Almost nobody saw coming. Here is where the story takes a turn that most people have completely missed. Before a single strike happened, before any visible military action, there was a phase of the operation that unfolded entirely in the shadows. A targeting and intelligence phase so extensive and so precise that it represented a fundamental change in how the United States was approaching the Iranian coastal threat. Traditional military planning against a target like this would have relied heavily on satellite imagery, signals intelligence, and historical pattern analysis, and all of those tools were used. But what made this operation different was the integration of something newer, something that Iranian military planners had not fully accounted for when they built their coastal concealment strategy. The hideouts had been designed to defeat the surveillance technology of 10 years ago. They had not been designed to defeat what exists now. Persistent overhead surveillance systems that can monitor a single location continuously for weeks, detecting patterns invisible to intermittent satellite passes. Underwater acoustic monitoring that tracks the movement of fast boats and submarines even when they operate without electronic emissions. And a layer of human intelligence, built painstakingly over years, that had finally reached the point where the locations, layouts, and operational schedules of the hidden facilities were known in detail that bordered on the extraordinary. When the final targeting packages were assembled, military commanders were not working from educated guesses, they were working from maps. Exact maps. And that is what made what happened next so devastating. The operation itself was layered in a way that revealed just how thoroughly the strategy had been thought through. The opening phase did not look like an attack at all. Electronic warfare assets positioned across the region began a coordinated suppression campaign hours before anything kinetic happened. Iranian radar systems along the target coastlines experienced what appeared to be equipment malfunctions. Communication links between coastal units and command centers developed strange interference. Automated warning systems that should have detected incoming threats simply did not respond the way they were designed to. By the time anyone in the Iranian military chain of command understood what was happening, the window to react had already closed. The second phase arrived from multiple directions simultaneously. Naval surface vessels operating in the Gulf launched precision cruise missiles timed to converge on targets within seconds of each other. B-52 bombers flying from Diego Garcia delivered strike packages that had been planned with a precision that still has analysts discussing the targeting methodology. And a component of the operation that has received almost no coverage involved submarine-launched weapons striking from positions beneath the surface, eliminating the possibility of any early warning or intercept attempt. The targets were not random. They were not simply the most visible Iranian military positions along the coast. Every target in the strike package had been selected, specifically because of its role in the shadow network. Weapon storage facilities hidden beneath civilian-looking structures, boat maintenance facilities embedded inside working harbors, underground drone assembly and launch sites carved into coastal hillsides that had never appeared on any public intelligence assessment. The message was not just that these facilities could be hit. The message was that the United States knew exactly where they were. Every single one. What happened in the immediate aftermath is where the story gets even more complex. The Iranian military's initial response was muted in ways that surprised outside observers. There were no immediate retaliatory strikes. The official statements that emerged from Tehran were careful, measured, almost deliberately vague about the scale of what had actually happened. And that restraint was not a sign of weakness. It was a sign that the operation had hit something far more sensitive than just physical infrastructure. When you lose a conventional military base, you can announce it, you can frame it as an act of aggression, you can use it to rally domestic support, to build international sympathy, to justify your next move on the geopolitical chessboard. But when you lose a secret network that you officially denied existed, you cannot do any of those things. Acknowledging the full extent of the damage would mean acknowledging the full extent of the hidden infrastructure. It would mean confirming to every regional government, every intelligence service, every adversary who had been watching, that the shadow network was exactly as extensive as the most aggressive threat assessments had always claimed. The silence from Tehran was not calm. It was the sound of a very serious strategic calculation happening in real time. Because the Iranian military command was now facing a question that had no good answers. If the Americans knew the location of every hidden coastal facility with that level of precision, what else did they know? How deep did the intelligence penetration actually go? Which other elements of the asymmetric deterrence strategy had been fully mapped and were now sitting in targeting packages waiting for a decision to be made? The operation had done something that missiles alone can never fully accomplish. It had created doubt. And in military strategy, doubt is often more paralyzing than destruction. But here is what most people watching this situation are completely overlooking. The coastal hideouts that were struck represented one layer of Iran's asymmetric strategy. An important layer, absolutely. A layer that has been significantly degraded by what just happened. But Iran's military doctrine was never built around a single layer. It was built around redundancy, around adaptation, around the assumption that any single element of the system might eventually be compromised. Which means the question that matters most right now is not what was destroyed. The question is what was not. Iranian military planners had already begun dispersing assets before the strikes happened. Not because they knew exactly what was coming, but because the pattern of American surveillance activity in the region had been intense enough in recent months that some level of precautionary dispersal had begun. Some weapon stockpiles had been moved, some fast boat units had been repositioned to secondary locations that intelligence analysts are still working to fully identify. And there is the deeper layer that sits beneath all of this. The proxy network, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthi forces in Yemen, Iraqi militia groups. These organizations maintain their own weapons caches, their own operational planning, their own capacity to act in ways that do not require direct coordination with Iranian coastal infrastructure. Striking the hideouts was a significant blow. But it was not checkmate. The game continues. It just changed shape overnight. The regional response to what happened has been almost as revealing as the operation itself. Gulf state governments that publicly maintained careful neutrality in the American-Iranian confrontation have been sending very different signals through private diplomatic channels. The message coming back from Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and Doha is one of quiet satisfaction combined with genuine anxiety. Satisfaction because the Iranian shadow network posed a direct threat to their own shipping, their own energy infrastructure, their own security calculations. Anxiety because escalation in the Gulf has a way of expanding in directions that nobody fully controls. Israel, which has maintained its own independent campaign against Iranian weapons networks for years, watched the American operation with intense interest. The coordination between American targeting intelligence and Israeli regional intelligence in recent years has been deeper than anything publicly acknowledged, and the strike packages that were used against the coastal hideouts reflect a level of detailed geographic knowledge that almost certainly benefited from that intelligence sharing relationship. Russia and China are both watching with the specific concern of nations that have invested heavily in relationships with Tehran. For Moscow, an Iran that is militarily weakened and strategically uncertain becomes a less useful partner in its own regional calculations. For Beijing, the disruption of Gulf stability creates oil market volatility that Beijing ultimately has to manage. Neither country wanted this escalation. Neither country has obvious leverage to shape what happens next. And across the broader Middle East, every militia commander, every proxy network leader, every non-state actor that has operated under the assumption of Iranian backing is recalculating tonight. Because if the hideouts could be found, if the shadow network could be struck with that level of precision, the question every one of those commanders is asking themselves is the same. What do they know about us? Here is the part of this story that will define what comes next, and it is the part that nobody can fully predict. American military planners understand something fundamental about operations like this one. A strike that degrades capacity without eliminating the will to fight creates a very specific kind of danger. It hardens resolve. It accelerates alternative planning. It pushes an adversary toward options that might previously have been considered too extreme or too risky. Iran's military leadership is not going to simply absorb what happened and return to the previous equilibrium. That is not how these situations develop. The pressure inside the Iranian system to demonstrate that the country cannot be struck without consequence is enormous. The political cost of appearing weak, of allowing the destruction of the coastal network without a visible response, is significant. But the response, when it comes, will almost certainly not look like a direct military confrontation with American naval forces. Iran knows those calculations. Iran has always known those calculations. The response will look like something else. It might look like a sudden intensification of Houthi maritime operations in the Red Sea. It might look like an uptick in militia activity in Iraq targeting American positions. It might look like a cyber attack against Gulf state infrastructure, sophisticated enough to create disruption, but calibrated to stay below the level that would trigger another direct response. It will be asymmetric. It will be deniable. It will be designed to impose costs without providing a clean justification for further escalation. In other words, it will look exactly like the strategy that just got struck, because that strategy is not gone. It is damaged. It is disrupted. But the doctrine behind it, the logic that has driven Iranian military thinking for decades, that survives entirely intact. What just happened in the Persian Gulf is one of the most significant military operations in this region in years. But its ultimate meaning will not be determined by what was struck or how precisely the operation was executed. Its meaning will be determined by what happens next. If the strike creates a genuine recalibration in Tehran, if it forces a strategic rethinking of the asymmetric campaign that has been running against American and Allied interests, then it will be recorded as a decisive moment, a turning point when the hidden became visible and the cost of the shadow war became too high to sustain at its previous intensity. But if the operation instead accelerates Iranian adaptation, forces the proxy networks into even more dispersed and harder to target configurations, and hardens the political will inside Iran to find new ways to pressure American positions in the region, then the story is far from over. The Persian Gulf has a way of absorbing dramatic moments and continuing regardless. The Strait of Hormuz has watched empires rise and fall on its shores for thousands of years. It watched the British withdraw. It watched the Soviet Union collapse. It has watched every American administration since Jimmy Carter try to find a stable strategic framework for managing Iranian power in the Gulf. None of them fully succeeded. And tonight, as smoke clears from coastlines that were supposed to be invisible, as Iranian commanders take stock of what was lost and what remains, as American military planners watch and wait and wonder whether the signal was received the way it was intended, the Gulf watches too, patient, ancient, certain that whatever comes next, it will not be the last chapter. The only question is how many more chapters remain before something changes permanently. And nobody on Earth knows the answer to that question tonight. Not yet.